feel being part of a CMJ?
I feel
it's good to me.
Honored, really. It's cool. Just like that's where we started out on all the college stations, and we got
now, a year later, we get to see some excellent results.
That's our hour a night to get all our aggressions out and everything we're pissed off about. We get out in that 1 hour period, and it leaves the rest of the time for us to have fun and get drunk.
I think we're powerful live because we're feeling music and it's true, and we're not trying to portray anything that's, I don't know, prefabricated or trying to be something we're not. It's just raw emotion and heavy groove, and you can't deny any of that.
The music industry is a dog-eat-dog world, and the metal side of things is no exception. Most artists, especially ones that could be seen as either fads or very gimmick-based or trendy, tend to fade away in only a matter of months, and at longest, a couple of years. But every once in a blue moon, a band will come along that changes the aisles of music history forever. Korn is a band so massive and beloved at this point that it's safe to say that even your grandma knows who they are. Starting off as a revitalization of metal in the mid-90s to becoming MTV superstars by the turn of the century. I know some of you might cringe at what I'm about to say, but Korn is up there with the Beatles, Van Halen, Metallica, and Nirvana in terms of their impact. It ultimately changed the entire landscape of music forever and brought in an entirely new era. As I spoke about in my new metal video, Korn was the breakout artist that caused a massive shift in not only how metal music was perceived, but who listened to it, opening the genre up to far more experimentation and fusions than what had ever been seen in the past. And for better or worse, this would lead to multiple new subgenres of metal and an entirely new scene in the greater musical landscape. And even to this day, Korn has remained a force to be reckoned with and hold on to one of the most loyal fan bases in the industry. But this didn't all come from just another LA cock rock group attempting to make it in the circuit. Rather, Korn is a band whose formation came from a mixture of hard work, ambition, and a lot of drug use and childhood trauma. And it's a story I feel is more than worth delving into. So let's put on our Adidas tracksuits and delve into the dark early days of Korn.
Were you like popular guys, or did you?
I was the man. You don't even know.
I was goofy.
You were the goofy one.
No, I wasn't really goofy, but I was like kind of goofy.
He was goofy. I went to school with him.
Is it weird to have like an adoring crowd, like crazy for you now?
It is. It's weird. It's something I always dreamed about, and now it's like I'm living my revenge because I never got any attention back when I was a little kid. So
yeah, are you ever going to go to your high school reunion?
I can't wait. I'm gonna come in a helicopter.
Before there was Korn, there was LAPD, a funk metal band formed by 3 of the 5 members who would later form the initial band. That being drummer David Silveria, guitarist James Monkey Schaefer, and bassist Reginald Fieldy Aravizu. They would be joined by the singer Richard Morrill and embark on a short-lived 3-year career. And while ultimately not the most exciting band in the world, what's important about LAPD is just how much they would set the stage for the future success its members would see, mostly in setting up the relationships between members. Monkey and Fieldy were old high school friends from Bakersfield and already had a pre-existing relationship and chemistry with one another. When the band was getting together, they would put out ads for a vocalist and drummer, eventually meeting both Silvera and Morrill. Silvera would impress the band during his audition by showing off his signature drumming style, all while being a 15-year-old high school dropout. The band would quickly write a demo and ship it off to labels, and it would later be re-released as Love and Peace Dude. And honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that this would ultimately lead to the band that we're all here to talk about today, Love and Peace Dude would be forgotten to time. By no means is this bad, but it's just very generic. But if there is anything to take away from this release, is that even at this early stage, the tight and groove-oriented sound was already apparent, particularly in how well Fieldy and Monkey played off each other's riffs. And honestly, the big star of the show here is Fieldy, showing off some impressive bass chops, as well as this is one of the few projects where you can actually hear Monkey play a guitar solo. And if I really do take off my hindsight bias, this demo is pretty good, and for its time it was probably fantastic. While not the most unique sound in the world, what's here is a lot of skill, talent, and promise that would ultimately be followed up on. After putting out their demo, the band would opt to move down to Los Angeles, with Monkey being the only member to protest against this and remain in Bakersfield. Without him, LAPD would start to play shows and develop a small local following, even catching the eye of a few small indie labels. Most importantly, they would be given a contract by a small LA group called XXX Records, who, in Fieldy's words, gave them a pitiful contract. But they signed it regardless, re-releasing their demo as a full-on EP, only to follow it up a year later with their first and only full-length. Who's Laughing Now was supposed to be the band's real beginning, but would ultimately be its swan song. It continued to delve into the sound that the band developed with their demo. But despite the decent debut, singer Richard Morrill would soon opt to leave the band upon meeting the woman he would later marry, as well as his mounting drug addiction. This would cause the other three members to feel as if they had to start all over again, bringing an untimely end to LAPD.
You've written these personal lyrics. Do you ever feel weird about performing them live?
Well, I do on one song. I won't perform it live, but most, it's a release. I'm doing it for kids too. They get to come to the shows, get all those aggressions out, have a good time, and just feel, leave feeling they got it off their chest, So, it's working out good. Lots of kids relate to what I'm talking about. I'm happy for that.
Before we jump into the formation, we should get to know our two other band members, namely Brian Head Welch and Jonathan Davis. Brian was another high school friend of James Monkey Schaefer and had grown up in the Bakersfield area like the rest of the band. His origins are pretty mundane, as he was just a metalhead teenager, and despite later going on to be a creative and innovative guitar player, he actually started off as wanting to be a drummer, only picking up the guitar when his father convinced him to do so. He would play in a few bands, but only really would come into prominence after LAPD had broken up and rebranded as a group named Creep, where the band would recruit Head to be their second guitar player, and apparently, according to the band, should have had his own comedy show.
You got Head, should have his own comedy show, because he's the funniest guy I've ever met in my life.
Now, Jonathan Davis, on the other hand, is a dark and twisted rabbit hole. And while I won't go into super heavy details here because there's enough for an entire documentary, what's important to note about John Davis is that he had a very strange and often tragic life, and the trauma and abuse he suffered would end up being one of Korn's key elements to their success. Davis was a child of divorce, to an actress mother and a musician dad. He originally lived with his mother, but was later sent to be with his father due to some bad situations that had happened. And this turbulence would come to define Jonathan Davis's life, mostly due to the guilt he felt for intruding on his father's new family, as well as his asthma, which would leave him hospital-bound on a monthly basis from the age of 3 until he was ultimately 10 years old. He would also experience abuse at the hands of his stepmother, where she would constantly belittle and bully him. And while Davis has never fully delved into what went on outside of her putting Thai hot oil and other nasty things in his drinks to harass him, he did write the song Kill You about his experience of the abuse he went through and his violent sexual fantasies about her. So whatever happened must have deeply affected him. So the other important element of his upbringing was that as a teenager, he would get hired as a coroner's assistant and pursue a career in mortuary work.
I don't know, something about dark stuff has always grabbed me. So I'm like, I wonder what it's like to go cut up dead bodies. So I did 3 interviews to get in. They had to do a psych background, everything. And I finally got in and I started doing autopsies at 17. So I did that 17, 18. And then I went to Frisco and went to the San Francisco College of Mortuary Science and became a mortician. Came back here, was an embalmer. And then at night, I would go to the coroner's office and I was studying to be an investigator. So I didn't have to get my hands dirty per se doing autopsy. I'd just be an investigator and go investigate, deaths. And then I got the call and we come try out for Korn. And that was it. That was amazing.
While he enjoyed it, it did eventually take its toll on him. There's a few songs written about his experiences, and ultimately when the opportunity to leave and pursue a career with Korn came around, Davis would leave his mortuary life behind. But it never truly left him, as he describes that his experience left him with PTSD. I had post-traumatic stress from seeing dead babies and young kids that had died after finding their parents' stash of drugs. Shit that I shouldn't have been seeing at 16 or 17 years old. I had to have a lot of therapy to make the nightmares go away, but I got through it and it made me appreciate life a lot more.
Nobody sounded like us, so people were like, damn, we were heavy. And when everybody, the first time they heard us, were like, oh my God. I remember that. There's nothing like that going on back when we first started. Now that we came out, there's been all the hybrid bands.
1993 would see LAPD rebrand itself as Creep and enlist Head as their new guitarist, as well as vocalist Corey Sink, who quickly began to work on demos with them. The early work of the band is far more indicative of what Korn would later become than what LAPD was, with slower, heavier guitars and a much darker sound, though the vocals would be far different from what we would hear with Davis later on. Essentially, Creep sound is what would happen if the band formed with Alice in Chains vocalist Lane Staley as the singer, with more contemporary grunge vocals and big anthemic choruses. It was also a much more Chili Peppers-esque sound than the Mr. Bungle influence that would later come to define the band's early work. And at this point, the hip-hop element still hadn't become a staple of the band's sound. But despite this, the Creep demo is actually pretty fantastic. I do highly recommend giving it a listen, but as the story goes, this incarnation of the band just wouldn't last, as the rest of the members would ultimately opt to kick Corey from the group and look for a new vocalist. And upon hearing Jonathan Davis perform with his previous band Sex Art, a band that also contained future Orgy guitarist Ryan Shuck, they would approach him to join as their new vocalist. And while Davis would initially decline, he would later re-audition for the band, apparently because he saw a psychic who told him to do so. With this new lineup, the band would change their name from Creep to Korn. And again, they would leave Bakersfield, but instead of going to LA, this time they would go to Huntington Beach. Around this same time, the band had begun developing a relationship with an at the time up-and-coming producer, Ross Robinson, someone who would help develop the band into their defining image and sound. Ross was the producer the band worked with when Creep did their demo, which was one of Ross's first projects, and would follow up the Creep tape with Korn's demo, Nader Meyer's Mind, and this is where we would be introduced to the band's signature sound. The heavy guitars, Jonathan Davis's gravelly voice, David's heavy and energetic drumming, and even the morbid artwork of a tattered goth ragdoll, this was the birth of Korn, where all the elements that the band would later expand on and become famous for had first set root. While the production was still a bit rough, Ross Robinson's raw and emotional production style is much more prevalent here than what had ever come before. This demo was groundbreaking for its time and captured the essence of what the band would eventually evolve into, finally embracing the Mr. Bungle sound and hip-hop elements that they would become known for. From here, the band would begin to amass a local following, though critics and labels didn't really get it, and at the time received the band pretty negatively. But after fighting tooth and nail, yet failing to get signed, serendipitously, Paul Pontius of Epic Records would end up seeing the band perform at an LA club, and after the show he was so impressed, he opted to sign the band on spot. And with this newfound funding from a major label, the band would now begin work on their debut record.
Monkey came up with it.
It's kind of show you like the dark side of everything that's innocent, pretty much, because without this, it's an innocent picture. But when you add the shadow, it's the dark side to the picture. You know what I mean? You know what I mean?
Like the unknown of...
Do you think it could be misinterpreted, though?
Yeah.
Yeah, by people that have no clue.
It is misinterpreted.
It's misinterpreted a lot, but
It is, eh?
it's just whatever you
Who's to
get out of
say,
it.
you know, if it's misinterpreted or not. You know, their interpretation just is their interpretation, not that it's a misinterpretation.
While a major record deal and growing public interest would usually be a great sign of things to come, this is where drugs really started to enter the picture.
When we were in these younger bands, they were kind of like hair metal bands, you know, and the whole image was to be really skinny with this, like, look like a Q-tip kind of, you know, big hair, little stick body, you know, and
tight pants,
yeah. So it's like, you know, hey, if you take these, you know, speed pills right here, you won't be hungry. And so I started, you know, getting into that.
None of the members were really strangers to narcotics by any means, but this was around the time that speed had entered the picture for just about everyone. It started before Korn blew up. I started doing speed when I moved to Huntington, and there's a lot of speed there from Bakersfield. And I got hooked up with someone that was giving me tons of it there. Aside from Fieldy, Jonathan Davis was one of the first to really get hooked on it, but around the same time, so did guitarist Head.
And so I did it with this pink stuff, like biker crank speed, and she was just so pretty. And she was doing it, and I was like, hey, let me do something. And I did it, and I remember going home and trying to go to sleep, and I was like, this sucks. I'm never going to do this stuff again. And I didn't for like another couple years, and then I was drunk one night, and I did it, and I was like, you know what? You're not supposed to try to sleep. You're supposed to try to stay up. So work with the drug. Maybe it'll be better this time, and I liked it then. And then I started bad choice.
While over the years each member has gotten clean, it doesn't change the fact that Korn's first two records are incredibly influenced by their drug of choice, as well as copious amounts of alcohol. It was one big fucking party, always just out of our minds drunk. By the time it was bedtime, we were just hammered. Jonathan Davis often talked in interviews about how much the band depended upon substance abuse, with Head also remarking this in an interview. I was trying not to do speed. When I was 10, 12 years old, I didn't think about doing any drugs while doing my record. I thought about doing a record, you know? So I was trying not to ruin my experience. But I was addicted, and so it was off and on. But outside of the drugs, the analog process Robinson chose would also help define the record, choosing Indigo Ranch Studios as the place where the band would produce their debut. And use of vintage analog gear was essential in capturing the raw and gritty sound that the band was going for, attempting to redefine how heavy music could be made. And once you hear the record, it's evident that they were more than successful. The self-titled album is crushingly heavy, both in tone and emotion. To that point in time, there was nothing like it, and there's a good reason why the song Blind is often referenced as metal's equivalent to Smells Like Teen Spirit. Once the self-titled album was released, it shattered what was previously thought as metal and spawned an entirely new subgenre and sound. And to actually talk about the record, the music of Korn's debut is nothing short of groundbreaking. Even by today's standards, it still sounds fresh, as none of the copycats the band spawned ever fully captured the lightning in the bottle that the band did. What is instantly notable about the record is how groove-oriented and slower-paced the songs are compared to other metal bands of this era. Guitarists Monkey and Head focus on creating soundscapes and playing off each other in an almost dualistic way when not playing the more crushing and heavy riffs. The bass and drums, on the other hand, play much more into hip-hop territory, as David Silvera's drumming caters much more to creating beats for the band to riff over, where the bass drives a song rather than miming the guitars. It might seem standard by today, but again, during this era, there was nothing like this and it was completely new. And these elements were put center stage with the album's opening track. Korn chose to start it off with Blind, knowing it was their best song to introduce listeners to the odd and strange record that they were about to experience. and its video was just another way of showing this off, as Korn looked nothing like your typical metal band. All this was expanded on even further with the record's second track, Ball Tongue.
Who do you think you are? What do you want from me? You got nothing to think about me.
The weird and abstract sounds with Jonathan's warbly and pained voice paints a type of darkness and aggression unlike anything else. The lyrics were also far more direct and personal than what was typically heard in metal at the time. The legendary song Clown captures this perfectly, being far from anything that could be considered poetry, but presenting the listener with a blunt image of being harassed and bullied simply for not fitting in. Turn if you like, throw your hate at me. With all your might, hit me, 'cause I'm strange, hit me. Tell me I'm a pussy and you're harder than me. What's with you, boy? Think hard? A tattooed body to hide who you are? Scared to be honest? Be yourself? A cowardly man. While isolated, it sounds like edgy teenage ramblings, but when combined with the music, it's crushingly cathartic. The lyrics are honestly one of the more undersung reasons as to why Korn was able to blow up. While some tracks are infamous for their nonsense nature, others were far more direct in their meaning. I'm sick and tired of people treating me this way every day. Who gives a fuck right now? I've got something to say. To all the people that think I'm strange and I should be out here locked up in a cage, you don't know what the hell is up now anyway. You got this pretty boy feeling like I'm enslaved to the world that never appreciated shit. You can suck my dick and fucking like it. As to not get zucked for saying a word YouTube really hates, I'll refer to the song's name as Baguette. And as you heard, the lyrics are very on the nose with their frustration and anger. It's not meant to be poetry or even pretty at all. It's not even really meant to be all that deep. Rather, it's a scream of pain and release. Something that cuts all the fat and all the filler and just lets go. Which is a large part of why this record clicked with so many people. Most rock and metal bands of this era lacked substance and could either be chalked up to cock rock bands singing about tits and coke, or it was metal bands singing about war and anything else they thought was badass. I'm looking at you, Megadeth. This is, painful. The more socially conscious stuff sat within the alternative scene, and lyrics close to this were really only heard in grunge. So a metal band candidly writing songs about bullying, abuse, addiction, and pain was something that not only caught a lot of people's attention, but resonated with many of those who would become fans. The track Fake also takes on this, while also showing off more the mature and eerie side of the band's songwriting.
I can't stand what you put me through. You last a lie, chill high.
You try so hard to be wanted. False emotions tell you fronted. I think being a person relies on one thing. Be yourself. Let you come through. You're too afraid to really be. Someone who isn't false and doesn't care to be. The lyrics here may as well be an edgy Hallmark card, but that doesn't make them any less impactful, especially for the time. The open honesty about insecurities, mental illness, and abuse was something that the band indulged in, and would come to define vocalist Jonathan Davis. Helmet in the Bush is another track that explores drug abuse. Given that JD was the first member to get clean, it's only fitting that he'd be the first to publicly speak on his struggle. I keep asking, will you again please try? It's haunting, this takes my mind. Days keep passing, line after line. I don't feel right. Please, God, "Don't Let Me Die Tonight." The lyrics really paint a clear picture that speed had already taken its toll on Jonathan, as he felt overwhelmed but dependent on it. Speed would be the band's poison of choice through their early days, and as the years went on, it was a topic covered in their music more and more. But as personal as Helmet in the Bush gets, it doesn't even hold a candle to the album's final offering. Daddy is a fucked up song. A claustrophobically personal track where Javis just vomits his trauma onto the listener. That clip alone should tell you just what kind of territory we're about to delve into. And the music itself is intensely menacing, darker than anything else that could be heard across the record. But even this pales in comparison to how it plays out come the chorus. Daddy is dysphoric in every way, and for years the band refused to play it live. While the more cynical might see it as exploitative, the ending bit where Jonathan breaks down and cries is something that just can't really be faked. And this isn't a bit that goes on for just a few seconds. It lasts a few minutes. Daddy deals with sexual abuse at the hand of an elder. While it's framed in the lyrics as a father taking advantage of their own child, Jonathan would explain the meaning and background in an interview. "It's not about my parents molesting me or any of that shit. It was about me being abused by someone else and my parents not really believing me, which I believe happens to tons of kids. I believe tons of kids go back and say, 'Hey mom, dad, this shit happened,' and they're like, 'Stop fucking lying,' or they don't understand. And they were real young at the time, and I don't blame them. It was my babysitter, and she has since passed away. Karma's a bitch." The traumatic experience and its lasting effects put on full display allowed for the band to not only stand out for being far more brave and emotionally resonating than their contemporaries, but also allowed for those who turned on the album to connect with the music on a level far deeper than what just a good breakdown or relatable lyric would allow, as well as not falling into the trap of just being dark for dark's sake, carving the band a unique niche unlike anything before them, and one that would only blossom into one of the biggest and most influential scenes in music history.
People saying that they get their lives changed by what I write, that's the biggest reward in the world, and I don't have no problem with that. People are going to say that I've changed. If I actually change someone's life by just singing, I mean, that's the full reward. That's what you want to do in music. It's not money or nothing like that. It's just what you feel in here. And I get that every day, so I'm the happiest person in the world right now.
After release, the self-titled record was received very well by critics, averaging mid to high scores across most outlets. Though this didn't see the band reach overnight success. Critics and listeners had a hard time categorizing the record, with some calling it groove metal and others calling it funk metal. The subsequent tours didn't help much either, opening on tours for thrash metal pioneers Megadeth, hardcore legends Biohazard, And even the hip-hop group House of Pain, Korn just never really fit in with any of the crowds that they played for. But in doing so, this actually helped them earn a reputation for having a Neapolitan fan base across many genres and demographics, and would earn them a bit more of a cult status, becoming a niche group that attracted fans across the musical spectrum and appealed to an entirely new niche. And as we all know, this would play off in the coming years with their follow-up record Life is Peachy, gathering them an even bigger audience, and their third record, Follow the Leader, becoming one of the most important records of the 90s and turning the Bakersfield Boys into MTV superstars, with them still going strong all these years later. But even now, revisiting the roots, it's not hard to see where the success came from. The members, especially Jonathan Davis, came from some painful and traumatic backgrounds that afforded them a drive and passion others just couldn't muster. And the multiple incarnations of the group that led to the final act gave them years of experience in songwriting, marketing, and as musicians that sharpened them up to a point where success was only a matter of time. And that's without mentioning the fact that Korn had essentially launched Ross Robinson's career, a producer who would be integral to many amazing albums from other artists like Slipknot, The Cure, From First to Last, Norma Jean, and even MCR's Frank Iero. But with all that being said, subscribe, support me on Patreon, follow me on Twitter. I'll see you in the next video.